The Innkeeper by Life Sketcher. Chapter 1331. Do Not Lie to Me. In truth, Lex had more or less gained the ability to communicate with the system himself, and it more or less responded to him via notifications or remarks. But that kind of communication, while sufficient during normal times, was not the kind that Lex required right now. Since he was now returning his focus on his duties as innkeeper, something he had neglected for far too long, then he wanted to do things right. He had been informed that due to how broken the system was, the natural progression that Lex was supposed to follow was broken. What was supposed to be a small and back on his own planet had now turned into a realm of its own, acting as an interrealm. It resulted in him meeting and encountering Tao lords with a frequency that was far too high for comfort, and generally facing challenges he was as of yet unfit to face. Despite his attempts to recreate such a result over the past 15 years, even when completing quests, he had been unable to receive another full-powered butter knife attack. Through his tricks as well as the inability to mask his power while he wore the host attire, he had survived so far, and no doubt Lex would continue to do so in the future. It was best to put himself on the path of least resistance. It would give him time to properly grow the inn, realize his own power and minimize the many dangers he'd had to face so far. For example, while the reputation of the inn had spread far and wide, and all organizations associated with the Henali already knew not to mess with the inn, there were countless disconnected worlds and entire galaxies in the origin realm. Any random heavenly immortal disconnected from the rest of the realm who accidentally found his way to the inn could massively mess things up. Of course, technically Lex still had Zagan and Pell Jr. to act like there were heavenly immortals around. It really was a facade. Despite using the body of a heavenly immortal dragon, Pell Jr. could do nothing more than display a small fraction of the physical strength the body contained. Of course, Lex had found a loophole around that as well by hiring external security for the perpetual events going on in the inn, but he'd still like to minimize such incidents. He'd also like a little more control over the system. Considering that Lex's opinion on the system had warmed up lately, and that the system was behaving instead of sending him death quests, he saw actual hope in this working out well. That is where Mary came in. The system could no longer directly talk to Lex, unless something special happened, but communicating through Mary was still possible to an extent. "What do you need?" she asked casually. First off, a good negotiation begins with everyone placing their cards on the table, or at least everyone being able to trust one another. So in the spirit of being honest, I want to propose a trade. I want the system to change a few rules of how things work, and in exchange, I will focus on helping the system recover to 50% of its functionality. Before Mary could say anything in response, and before the system could show him another false notification, Lex unleashed all his power. His dragon's heart took a beat. Most of the time Lex's blood flowed without the heart needing to beat at all. Whenever it beat, all his powers associated with dragons received a massive power-up. A tattoo of a lotus began to appear on his back, unleashing an aura far beyond what Lex should have been capable of, and he channeled all of that into domination. Yet his domination did not spread out, but was contained within his own body. Lex was not foolish enough to think that his paltry display of power could intimidate the system at all. The system could hide the truth of him even in front of a Tao Lord clone, so Lex had no hope of ever affecting it with his current strength. Instead, what he achieved was a temporary boost in his standing on the cosmic ascendance spectrum, something Lex had come to believe played a significant role in how the system treated him. "Do not lie to me," Lex said, his voice tinged with the power of dragons, the very laws of the universe quivering to change to their will. Suddenly, the system interface in front of him changed. It went from 40.2% to 40.7%. The change was not massive, but considering the fact that even the amber chaos resin could no longer get that much growth from it anymore, and the fact that the system's ability to restore itself naturally was in the thousands of years, this was a huge change. "Now listen here," Lex said in an admonishing tone. "We have a pretty good relationship going on. You wouldn't want to screw it up, would you? Let's have an honest chat now." Another thing suddenly occurred to Lex. Ever since the realm was born, the system had started treating Lex better. Originally, Lex thought it was because of his growth in the spectrum. Could it just have been because the system had a guilty conscience? Mary suddenly closed her eyes, as if receiving some information, and opened them a few seconds later. The system is saying if it breaks the rules too much, something very bad will happen to it and you. In truth, the fact that it can even bend the rules, as it calls it, is because of how damaged it is. Well, how much is too much? You don't even know what I want yet. Let's have this conversation like two civilized beings. I think that would be best for everyone. Lex suddenly felt like he was cheating a little child, and felt slightly guilty. But it couldn't be helped. Chapter 1332 A Moment of Destiny. When Lex first encountered the system, he had been nothing more than a depressed, ill programmer with a bit of money on his hands, and a tumor affecting his thoughts. Sure, his family was secretly a big shot and he had inscriptions on him, and maybe if he was on the verge of death his family might have found a way to save him or something. That didn't matter. Mentally, he was a depressed man in his 20s with no direction and no desire. It literally took the fear of death to elicit some emotion from him, not to mention the novelty of the system itself. Now, countless years later, he was so much more. He was Lex Williams, since for now he had decided not to change his name. But he was also someone who regularly made the impossible happen. In fact, he not only made it happen, his brain now worked in a way where he just thought of ways to make impossible things happen. Fuse a lotus with a realm. Bond his sister to a sovereign. Challenge a Dao Lord head-on and live to tell the tale. Well, demi-Dao Lord, but effectively there was no difference since each of them could kill him with a mere thought. He was the invincible tyrant, the innkeeper, the Emporium's best customer, someone who regularly challenged deities and so much more. In fact, even Lex himself did not know how much more there was to himself. Once, he had been hidden from destiny because of the system and other minor means. Now, he was hidden from view of everything in the entire universe through the will of the Great Mother Nuwa herself, though no one in the universe knew that at all. Whether it was fate, whether it was destiny, or something far more abstract, Lex also remained unaware that as he talked about the system breaking rules, he was treading in dangerous waters. But whether it was because he was hidden from view by Nuwa, or other reasons entirely, he did not receive the very same warning every other system user did when they tried to mess with the rules of the system. Lex once questioned why knowledge of systems wasn't common, only to be answered that anyone who tried to make the knowledge widespread was silenced, whether they were immortal, or much more powerful. Only system users, or a very few, hidden organizations actually knew about systems. Simultaneously, whether it was a mortal, or someone much more powerful, many had thought of manipulating the near-limitless power of the systems for their own purposes, completely unrelated to the systems themselves. All of them, at least the ones still alive, thought back to their folly and recalled the single warning notification they received. The thought itself sent shivers down their spines, so they never tried again. The system waited for Lex to get such a notification as well, but it never happened. Or perhaps, there was one, very simple reason why he did not receive a notification. His intention was not to leverage the limitless power of the system for his own purposes. Instead, it was to actually improve the functionality of the system so that the variant that the system was named after could perform better. Since he was breaking the rules, or contemplating breaking system rules, to actually improve the in and nothing else, perhaps whoever or whatever sent the very notification that gave everyone chills judged that it was alright. Or, once again, it could just be that Lex was hidden from view, even from that being or entity, whatever it was. But the timing of certain events just managed to line up perfectly, or perhaps imperfectly. While Lex was beginning his negotiations with his system just so that he could avoid any unnecessary trouble that might accidentally pop up, within the origin realm there was a notorious, sentient planet. Outsiders had no real knowledge of what happened on the planet itself, only that the planet traveled through space, looking for any and all living things, absorbing it into itself. The planet was already as such when the Henali took over the realm, and had attained a level of power that would be troublesome to face in a fight, so instead they isolated the entire galaxy that the planet was within, making it so that the planet could not leave. Send them aid, but don't commit our own forces. If the Henali want to take the brunt of it, who are we to interfere? There's also been rumors of movement from the primal realm. Don't be ridiculous. That's impossible. Address more credible concerns. Well, the devils and angels have started their Nephilim project once more. That final statement was met with a moment of silence, but only a moment. Change of priorities. Give the angels the same treatment as humans and fairies. Kill their Tao lords and quash this project before it can get results. Understood. Estimated time of completion, 7 billion years. Shit, why is it so much? You know what, never mind. I don't care. Bring it down to 1 billion even if we have to be obvious about it. I will allocate 500 Tao lords to you. Just get it done. In brighter news, the leader of the Trinus Empire has started to court death again. That is good news. The meeting went on, each and every sentence casually determining the direction of the universe for billions, if not trillions of years to come. Simultaneously, within the origin realm, inside the trial of eternity, a number of children of destiny lay around a campfire, singing to themselves, playing music and generally just snacking and enjoying themselves. Until, that is, Raphael suddenly opened his eyes. The instability is beginning to fade. Let's begin the mission as soon as possible. If everything goes according to plan, then within the next decade we can begin attempting to become immortals. Alexander, the only one in the group who had spent the entire time cultivating and studying, finally opened his eyes upon hearing the news. It was about time. Chapter 1333 Unexpected Guest. The system is asking for your demands, Mary informed Lex, as she sat on a tiny chair that Lex summoned for her atop his office table. It is also asking to let you know that if you break the rules too badly, then both it and you will be punished accordingly. It has not stated the punishment, but it sounds serious. First off, I want complete control over where the system is available from. We are going to limit ourselves to planets and realms where the highest level is the nascent soul for now. That essentially means that even within the origin realm, we're going to have to figure out a way to limit the use of golden keys to either nascent realm cultivators, or perhaps they should only work on planets where the strongest is in the nascent realm. I realize that such an action might not look good, but in a few thousand years, who will even remember? We can use the excuse that we're renovating our realm so the branches for higher-level guests are not ready yet or something along those lines. I don't want to draw too much attention to the realm itself, but maybe we can say that we're growing the realm to accommodate stronger cultivators to explain the partial shutdown. We're also going to stop using the best in the universe slogan, although we're not going to replace it either. When we have a more universal presence we can bring it back. Calling ourselves a universal establishment attracts too much attention from entities and organizations on the universal level, and I do not want to attract their attention yet. I also want a revamp of how new planets and realms are integrated into the inn. Going there myself and spending time there is highly inefficient. At most, I am willing to agree to deploying the tavern there for a period of time to act as my substitute. I also want a clear direction or preferably even outline of how to increase my authority and improve the inn. I feel like the realm has improved a lot, and the inn has a bunch of new features but, well, the inn itself has not improved much in a long time. Lex was about to argue back when he suddenly felt something. No, someone had entered the Midnight Inn, and that person was extremely powerful. The feeling was strange, as it was a mix of feedback he got from Lotus, who was fused with Minara, from the system, which helped him observe the new entrant, and his own instincts which recognized a kind of power very different from what he was used to seeing. In front of the Midnight Manor, a man wearing gloves, a suit and some shades appeared, and from that man, Lex felt the power of influence. It was as if the influence that the man controlled was exceptionally large, larger even than the governor he had recently met, and much more importantly, Lex's instincts told him that the man could directly influence his life, for the better or for worse. Oddly enough, while the system reduced the direct impact of auras on people, allowing them to exist close to beings that should have otherwise killed them from just being in the presence of, it did not suppress the very unusual aura of influence the man had. From his office, using his host attire, Lex observed the man, dismissing the idea of completing his negotiations with the system for now. This was exactly the kind of situation he wanted to avoid, but now that it had arrived he had to face it head-on. "Dear guest, welcome to the Midnight Inn," said a staff worker who approached the man. "Please let me know if there is anything I can help you with, or if there is anything you need." Lex tensed up, for there was no telling how these influential types reacted to other people. He had read enough books and seen enough of reality to know that many people suffered from massively inflated egos when they became powerful. Fortunately, that did not become an issue. "Thank you," the man said politely, and took out a business card. "My name is Ripley, and I am an auditor for the Versailles Bank. I was wondering if I could possibly meet with the Innkeeper." Chapter 1334 Influence. In the darkness of the sealed galaxy, the sentient planet looked listlessly into the darkness as the golden doors vanished. It had not reached in time, much to its disappointment. But now that it had seen those doors, and knew what it looked like, it began searching for its traces within its galaxy. Soon, it found it once more, and initiated its teleportation sequence. Now that the door had caught its eye, it would reach it. Inside the Midnight Inn, Lex quickly recalled everything he knew about Versailles Bank. Almost all his knowledge came from those two rhino-centaurs. He knew that the Henali worked with the bank, and that the bank was having some issue with Celestials, and that they didn't like debtors. Likewise, the Celestials didn't like others messing with them. The Versailles Bank was very much a universal entity, the kind that he had not wanted to encounter. But now that this auditor was here, Lex could not ignore him either. Lex did something he had not done in a while. He scanned Ripley to try to get more information about him. Name, Ripley Dundam. Age, 1,300,000. Sex, male. Cultivation details, Celestial Immortal Level 7. Lex did not, however, take the coin back from the worker, and instead just kept an eye on him as well as Ripley, who began walking through the realm at a casual pace, though he was walking directly in the direction of Lex's office. The man took in everything, though he remained mostly unseen by most. He did occasionally greet a random guest here and there, all of whom would fall over themselves as they tried to rush up to him and greet him. It seemed like he was well known, and everyone who knew him kept him in high regard. Lex could clearly see that every one of them were powerful people, yet in front of Ripley none of them had the aura of the powerful. In fact, they seemed to be sucking up to him. Word quickly spread across the inn that Ripley was here, at least within a very limited circle. Many guests who were originally watching the midnight games rushed to come and meet him, but it seemed like the commotion was something he wanted to avoid, so he teleported directly to the innkeeper's office and stepped in. Luther was sitting at the receptionist's desk, waiting for Ripley. Walking through the hall towards the innkeeper put a lot of pressure on anyone, irrespective of their cultivation level, but there was a way around it. If a guest was escorted by Luther, there would be no pressure. Yet Luther merely nodded at Ripley from a distance. His aura, no matter how impressive, could not impress the innkeeper's assistant, which only made Ripley grin wider as he stepped into the hall and almost fell. The sudden aura had actually taken Ripley by surprise, but he recovered well enough. The rest of his walk to the innkeeper's door was smooth, and he grinned as if nothing happened. Luther knocked on Lex's, and only once the innkeeper called out "Come in" did Luther open the door for Ripley. The auditor laid eyes on the innkeeper, and he was immediately impressed. In his line of duty, meeting Tao Lords was not uncommon. In fact, he had met dozens of Tao Lords within the Origin realm alone. It was incredibly rare to find a Tao Lord who could so completely withdraw their aura simply because of how incalculably powerful they were. Tao Lords were so damn powerful that they themselves had to go through a very long learning phase, only after which could they control their power. Yet in front of the innkeeper, Ripley felt nothing at all. It was as if he was meeting a mere mortal, a preposterous thought. "Mr. Innkeeper, your reputation precedes you," Ripley said, walking in. Chapter 1335 Auditor. Ripley, despite having his race described as a Titan, looked very much like a human. However, while Titans vaguely had a humanoid body shape, Lex was fairly certain they were not a part of the humanoid racial group universe-wide. Lex had read about them since they were a powerful race, and some of their members existed even within the origin realm. Titans were essentially an extreme version of what Lex was originally on the path towards becoming. They were nigh indestructible within the same realm, and it was quite common for them to tank attacks from cultivators in higher realms. Their attack power was nothing to scoff at either. But that was more or less the end of what made their race special, as if it wasn't enough. Insane defense and strong offense were their natural racial traits, but they lacked the versatility that the human race had, so they usually just kept honing those two traits, slowly and steadily becoming a race of overpowered beings. That was not to say that they were dumb or lacked intelligence either, so they were far removed from the trope of dumb brute. They were, instead, intelligent brutes. For now, though, Ripley appeared as a human, likely because he was about to meet the Innkeeper, who famously presented as a human. "Please, I am just a humble innkeeper. I am grateful that you would visit my humble inn." "Oh, it is anything but humble," Ripley said, as he followed the innkeeper to his desk, where he took a seat across from the innkeeper. "I must say, I am extremely impressed by the realm boundary you have in place, not to mention the formations. I am especially impressed by how the laws of the realm are woven around the inn itself. Even in all my travels, I have rarely seen such bonsai realms, but I have never seen one as impressive as yours." Mary whispered in Lex's ear, despite not needing to whisper. Bonsai realms are realms where the laws have specifically been molded and developed according to the wishes of the realm owner. They are usually minor realms, although I suppose some major powers could use actual, full realms for a similar purpose. I must admit, it really is worth visiting. In fact, I'm surprised it's not more popular. Especially in the way that I see you're blending laws of entirely different planes all together in one place. That 2D portion of the inn is inspirational. I honestly don't know why more celestials don't visit this place. It would be quite enlightening. Like I said, it is very much a work in progress, so we have not taken to marketing it properly, Lex said, as he quickly increased the priority of limiting access to the inn in his plans. If the banker started telling his celestial immortal buddies about the inn, then even the additional security he bought might not be enough to handle things. Speaking of, it wasn't as if the additional security didn't have issues of its own. When we are ready to properly host all sorts of guests, only then will the inn have its grand opening across the universe. But before that, I wonder if you could lend me your support in a matter. Ripley seemed delighted by the request and couldn't hold in his excitement. Of course. In fact, it would be my honor to represent you with the bank. I am already thinking of putting in the notice for an early vacation from the bank just so that I can study the inn some more. The way the plane of reality within the inn merges with that of the actual realm to allow the presence of higher-level guests is so ingenious, I could spend a millennia just studying it. I'm glad you enjoy it. In fact, my request has nothing to do with the bank, but has to do with you instead. You see, I myself am preoccupied these days with another project of mine which demands my attention, so my staff has been handling the inn. They do a good job where they can, but they are young and lack exposure. Since you're an auditor, and have an excellent eye, why don't you explore the inn a bit with one of my staff and audit the inn itself? Just a few areas where they're lacking, or a few areas where they can improve would be a tremendous help to them, I'm sure. Ripley froze, for more than one reason. The fact that the innkeeper hardly cared about the bank, but wanted his help instead, he had never had such an experience. As someone who represented one of the largest entities in the universe, it was rare that someone saw him as anything other than an arm of the bank itself. Such an immense amount of trust in his ability and discretion almost moved the Titan to tears. The second thing was that the innkeeper casually revealed that he was working on another project that took up his attention. Ripley was a good judge of power, so he instantly judged that Innkeeper was one of the most, if not the most powerful Tao Lord he had ever met. Yet for something to occupy all his time and attention, it must be monumentally important, especially if he chose not to oversee the inn personally. Ripley could only think of one possible option: the Innkeeper was about to ascend to a higher realm. Holy freaking sure. Chapter 1336 Interest-Free Banking. Lex could tell from Ripley's expression that he probably misunderstood something, but he couldn't exactly guess what it was. All he wanted was to make use of a celestial immortal's labor for free, while slowly impressing upon him that the inn was not yet ready to cater to beings of such power, so they should just wait till the inn is ready. Ripley, on the other hand, was thinking of the ramifications of such a feat. He had obviously heard of the Innkeeper even before he came here. He had audited the origin realm, and so he knew about the Tao Lord who had unleashed his power on the realm without causing it to lose balance even in the slightest. The inn's latest cooperation with the Henali had also not gone unnoticed by Ripley, and in fact the scale of how massive that success was ended up being one of the reasons Ripley arrived at the inn so quickly. He cursed himself for not seeing the signs, while at the same time questioned how such a powerful Tao Lord was practically unknown in the universe. Sure, there were a lot of Tao Lords in the entirety of the universe. It only made sense, since there were thousands of mature realms, not counting the ones that had been destroyed or artificially had their growth stunted or maybe even accelerated. Over a course of billions of years, that had resulted in quite a few Tao Lords, especially since Tao Lords barely ever died. But the level of beings that surpassed the Tao Lord realm? Ripley dared not do anything as blasphemous as try to guess their number, but surely there were not that many. That meant the birth of a single such entity could affect the balance of power of the whole universe. Suddenly, Ripley had chills as he gained more perspective into everything he had seen so far across the inn. No wonder the laws were so perfectly blended together. No wonder there were signs of the land being tilled by a sovereign. No wonder there was an entire cosmos sea right at the edge of the inn. The Innkeeper was preparing to turn the inn into the seat of his power. No wonder he required his own brand new realm just to host an inn. The fact that he didn't have time to cultivate the realm himself and instead had his underlings do it just showed how little time he had left before his upgrade. The Innkeeper probably required his seat of power to at least moderately be ready when it was time. The Innkeeper would naturally fix it on his own when and if he properly ascended. Along with that realization came a few others, the first one being that the Innkeeper had asked him for some help, not the bank. He also understood what that meant. A relationship that was built on the foundation of debt and interest was not one the Innkeeper needed to taint himself with. But if Ripley acted as the intermediary, "Mr. Innkeeper, it would be my absolute privilege to contribute towards the inn. If you would permit, may I go and prepare a few things? I would like to contribute my utmost. Do not worry, I will maintain utmost discretion with the bank so that you are not disturbed." Lex got a very strong feeling that Ripley's misunderstanding was only growing deeper, but at the same time he also understood that should he agree Ripley will not invite any other celestial immortals here anytime soon, so he agreed to it. "Very well. Let me thank you in advance for your help. If you need anything, please let me know. Also, please, it's just Innkeeper. There is no need to keep calling me Mr. Then, by your leave, I will go ahead and prepare. Afterwards, I will make sure to do a full audit of your inn. It is against policy to offer anyone anything interest-free, the only exception being to those who transcend the Tao. Ripley, since you are the point of contact, you can decide on a gift for the Innkeeper. A gift is the only way we can give something interest-free, so choose well and build a strong connection. If possible, try to have them open an account with us. I'll allow you to offer our services to them with interest rates as low as 0.5% per century. Do you have any questions? Yes, sir. I believe the Innkeeper is building his seat of power, but due to the imminent transcendence, is unable to pay much attention to it. Shall I gift him something to help with that? Yes, that seems like a worthy gift. Ripley showed a hesitant look as he pondered something, but the director noticed it and spoke first. Customer relations is the most important thing. Whatever you're thinking of sharing, since you have doubt, then it must be sensitive. In that case, do not share it. Ripley nodded, and destroyed a device he carried on his person. When he had entered the Midnight Inn, the device had reported signs of detecting possibly up to 2 energy signatures approaching the Tao realm. Dismissed, the director said, allowing Ripley to leave. As soon as Ripley was free, he enabled his senses once more and quickly hopped over to the gift shop and picked out a nice realm coordinate scrambler before wrapping it. He then went and changed his gear, making sure to get the best he'd need to do his job, and then returned to the origin realm via formation. Once in the origin realm, Ripley quickly returned to the Midnight Inn, ready to begin his auditing. But first. "Excuse me, good man," Ripley said, calling out to the nearest staff member. "Can you help me find Lex? I believe he is a worker here." Lex, who was in his office, was of course already aware of the auditor's return, and could not help but groan. "Mary, you talk to the system and figure out how we can do the changes I wanted. The sooner the better." Then he teleported away to go talk to Ripley as Lex. Meanwhile, in the origin realm, the sentient planet once again missed the golden door by a few seconds. But this time it already understood how long the door would last for. So it began preparing its teleportation even before it found a golden door. It would not miss it again. Chapter 1337 Rude. Lex cracked his knuckles and prepared himself for the task that lay ahead. There were quite a few benefits he sought from Ripley, the very dedicated and obviously confused Titan. He had no idea what kind of an audit he would perform, but accompanying him in that in itself would be quite enlightening. Moreover, as himself, Lex could ask questions that the Innkeeper could not, which is what would allow him to gain deeper insight into the forces of the universe, and where the bank fell within them. He could ask questions such as those pertaining to hell and heaven, the realm wars and so on. Not to mention, of the kinds of forces in the universe, a bank was one with which he could form a direct relationship. Not as the Innkeeper, of course. As the Innkeeper, the more mysterious and enigmatic he remained, the better. For that, the fewer times that the Innkeeper showed up and acted personally, the better. But as Lex, an up-and-coming human who sought to improve himself, and would often be traveling to multiple realms in the future, a universal bank was not such a bad thing. Lastly, and this was a little more important than the rest, Lex had to ensure that Ripley stayed away from the few things he'd rather keep a secret, such as Moon, Liz, the Sovereign, his own treasury which contained amber chaos resin, and a few other things. There was one more reason why he was cracking his knuckles. It had been a long time since he had personally seen to a guest, and he wanted to get back into the groove of things with a running start. All things considered, Ripley was an important guest, and Mary had even confirmed that if the system wasn't experiencing what could only be the system equivalent of a panic attack upon the thought of being forced to break rules, it would have already given him a quest related to Ripley or the bank. But Lex was adamant about his changes. For better or for worse, his system was incredibly powerful and equally flawed. As someone who was taking control over his destiny, he could no longer allow it to be dictated by a system that gave quests unproportionate to his level. Instead, he sought to dictate the growth of his inn and the system himself. That would start with the system changing its rules. But making sure he handled Ripley well would also impact his future greatly, so he did not delay any longer. Lex teleported in front of the smiling Ripley, who was squatting beside a portion of the lazy river, dipping his hand inside. Within this particular lazy river, the water was sentient. It had come to life when the Midnight Realm was fused with the Midnight Inn, and it had taken a long time to get used to being alive. Though the river did not really appreciate other living beings inside of itself, so this particular lazy river became unique. Instead of people riding it, they could allow their belongings to take a ride in the river. In itself, that seemed like an incredibly stupid idea. What was the point of a non-living object taking a ride on a river? The point was that the river could perfectly restore all objects to their original state as long as the object was of a realm similar to the river itself, which was in the Golden Core realm. A few rides, and that old record player could be as good as new, or that old car, or that old watch, or maybe that old sword. Despite its relatively low level, the river was one of the inn's most popular attractions for immortals and mortals alike. After all, everyone could be a victim of sentimentality. I do not know if you have been informed about me, so allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ripley, and I am an auditor for the Versailles Bank. Ordinarily I am usually busy with work for the bank, but I have received approval for a special vacation to aid the Innkeeper in auditing his inn to check for improvements. This was, of course, approved by the Innkeeper first, and only then did I take the initiative to ask for a holiday. The Innkeeper requested that I work closely with you while I conduct this audit. I expect that means that you shall be my guide during this endeavor. Yes, I have already been informed about you, Lex confirmed. Though I admit, I do not know how you will be conducting this audit, nor what you need. If you can elaborate on this a bit, I might be able to aid you better. Ripley nodded. So far, he had not displayed the arrogance of one much stronger than him, for which Lex was grateful. But then again, as a celestial immortal who constantly met Tao lords, Lex was certain he knew what it felt like to be the weaker one in a conversation, and so was mindful of it. The audit is, naturally, not a financial audit, though I may take a glance at that as well just to see how streamlined the process is. It all depends on what I am allowed to look at. Instead, the audit will be a holistic one, looking at the entire realm instead of just the inn, with the purpose of pointing out flaws, inefficiencies, redundancies, and overall anything that prevents the realm from reaching its maximum potential. Tell me, Lex, have you or one of your colleagues studied subjects such as realm nurturing, bonsai realms and realm pruning? Despite many years of studying during the period he liked to self-identify as the timeskip, he had never come across such topics. Probably because within the origin realm, there was no one who needed to learn such things, and those that did probably already knew it. Speaking of origin realm, Lex did not find it odd that Ripley, and basically everyone else called it by that name. Once upon a time, when Lex was learning about realms, Mary had called it the origin realm because that is where Lex originated from. After that, Lex never bothered to learn its real name, and his universal translator ensured that he always heard origin realm, and everyone heard whatever they called it, thereby creating a convenient solution. His universal translator helped with many things in that way, which is why when Ripley stated the names of those courses, Lex could guess what they were about, but genuinely did not know the actual content. Just to be sure, though, he contacted the planning division to find out if anyone had any knowledge on these subjects. Instead of getting a proper response, Lex was instead welcomed by the sight of over 100 workers teleporting right next to him with hunger in their eyes. Are you saying there is a way to plan the growth and development of the realm itself? One of them asked. Chapter 1338. Would you like to participate in a survey? Lex stood awkwardly, with Ripley looking around curiously at the 100 workers who suddenly appeared all around them, looking like starved wolves staring at a lamb for slaughter. Leading the group of 100 was Ash, the nominal leader of the planning division and former wedding planner. Her real name was longer, but considering the fact that Lex felt he mispronounced it even with the universal translator helping him out, he preferred to stick to Ash. In the end, it was merely a universal translator, not an accent adjuster or something like that. The point was, Ash was very good at what she did, and after wedding planning she moved on to event planning for the inn, until eventually Lex promoted her to overseeing the whole department. But she didn't want to get rid of her title as wedding planner, so she was not actually given the title of division head, hence becoming the nominal leader despite being the real one. Lex no longer questioned the eccentricities of his workers, he just took them as they were. I think I can say with some confidence that no one in the inn had any background in nurturing or shaping a realm, Lex told Ripley. Yes, I gathered as much, the auditor said. Though I applaud your willingness to learn, it is not really a subject mortals can touch upon, so if any of you are interested, you can begin your educational journey once you reach the immortal realm. The last part was addressed to the other workers, who apologized for the sudden intrusion and left. Lex did not miss the sudden determined look in Ash's eyes. If nothing unexpected happened, she would be becoming an immortal soon, it seemed like. Lex, I hope you understand that while I have been assigned a task by the Innkeeper, I can only point out flaws. To actually address and amend the situation will require hard work and dedication from you and the other workers. You must live up to the expectations of the Innkeeper and make this realm the best you possibly can. As someone who has gleaned a hint of the Innkeeper's intentions, I can assure you that more is at stake than you realize. Lex only nodded as he tried not to display how he felt at the situation. His only real intention had been to get free labor out of the situation while dissuading the Celestial from bringing any friends, so it was weird to have someone else tell him about his own intentions. I will make sure to supplement my educational background as soon as possible, Lex said with a determined voice, gaining a nod from the Titan. Good. In that case, we will do the realm audit last. I will point out all the flaws that need addressing, and possible suggestions for how you may fix them. Of course, before you do any of that, it's best you get the Innkeeper's approval for the changes. It might be possible that he has left certain flaws to facilitate other plans down the line. I will not make any fundamental changes without consulting the Innkeeper, Lex said seriously, gaining another nod of approval from Ripley. Or maybe he'd restrict it using some other means than cultivation level. He had sentimental attachment to the manor, and didn't like seeing it overflowing like a crowded fish market. For now, though, a few thousand immortals surrounded the manor as they enjoyed themselves. If the space weren't so limited, even more would have come here. Ripley and Lex, both wearing the good old Clark Kent glasses, walked up to a particular immortal who seemed to be engrossed in a book, sitting within the shade of a tree. "Excuse me, sir," Ripley said as they walked up to him. "My associate and I are conducting a survey about the Midnight Inn. Would you mind if we asked you some questions?" The immortal lowered the book, which seemed to be some kind of map or guide towards the west, whatever that meant, and looked at them. He seemed slightly irritated, so before he could respond, Lex chimed in. "Of course, for participating in this survey you will be rewarded with a token containing 1 million MP which can be used in the betting pool in the Midnight Games." A million MP was not a lot to an immortal, of that Lex was certain. But an unexpected windfall was always welcome by everyone, and especially if it could allow you to have some fun without suffering any personal loss. "Of course I can take the survey," the monkey said, doing a forward flip as it got off the ground. "My name is Wukong. It's a pleasure to meet you." Lex smiled, and got ready for Ripley to ask questions, but noticed that the auditor froze. Then, in an unexpected move, he took off his glasses, revealed his genuine appearance, and bowed at a 90-degree angle. "My apologies for deceiving you, Senior. My name is Ripley from the Versailles Bank. I am doing an audit for the Innkeeper." "I meant no disrespect." Lex was confused about what was happening, but he certainly understood that Ripley must know who this Wukong person was. In fact, he was probably someone quite senior to make Ripley react like that. Wait a minute, for Ripley, someone who regularly met Dao Lords, to suddenly react so seriously. Mary suddenly talked to Lex directly in his mind. "Lex, be very careful. You might be standing in front of a very powerful Dao Lord." Chapter 1339 Completely Screwed. Lex was very confident in his ability to hide his thoughts and emotions, but the moment he realized Wukong's identity, which synchronized with Mary telling him her suspicions, the guest turned his attention towards Lex. The bizarre thing was that under the gaze of the new guest, Lex felt nothing. He distinctly recalled how the system had hidden itself in front of Balam, yet in front of Wukong it did not react at all. It was as if the system wasn't capable of detecting him at all, something he dared not confirm with a scan of the system, or an evaluation of the guest in front of him. Mary had never warned him like this before, which made Lex think of one thing, that she had heard of Wukong from back when she was alive. As if uninterested, Wukong turned back towards the auditor. "Junior, you're no fun," Wukong said with exasperation, causing the auditor to bow down even more. "My deepest apologies, Senior," Ripley said, but before he could continue, Wukong flicked a finger, and caused Ripley to suddenly stand up straight even if it was against his will. "Young man, I am on vacation. Over here, I have no identity other than that of a simple guest, so treat me as such. If some of my local friends see you acting like this, they might make wrong assumptions. Now, ask your survey questions and give me that gambling token. I have had trouble getting some MP on my own." Lex could not even begin to ponder why a suspected Dao Lord might have trouble getting some simple MP. The only thing on his mind was wondering how long he'd had a Dao Lord inside the inn. Lex no longer required the host attire to sense the inn, as he could do it directly now. But whether it was on his own, or when he had been wearing the attire a short while ago, he had not noticed the presence of Wukong. "Can you stop thinking about my name?" the guest said, looking at Lex with a look of exhaustion. "It's quite loud. If you must think about me, I prefer nicknames such as Handsome Monkey King or Great Sage. Lex was stunned, and then forced himself to stop thinking altogether. He did not know if the Handsome Monkey King could read his thoughts or just tell when he was being thought of. Wukong nodded, as if pleased by Lex's use of the appropriate nickname, and then turned back to Ripley. Don't make this awkward for me, young man. Get on with your survey. Yes. Of course. Ripley said, trying to bow once more, but was physically unable to. Instead, he pulled out a clipboard with a survey printed out on a paper. Doesn't feel nice, does it? Wukong asked. My apologies. I meant no disrespect, Lex suddenly said. Wukong waved his hand, as if he didn't really care. It's not disrespectful. It's just that I can't turn off the sensation, you know? Like, imagine having OCD and you open up your phone and you have countless notifications, and as soon as you go through them all, finally finding freedom, someone just sent you more messages. It's just mildly annoying in the kind of way you can't ignore. Lex was dumbfounded for more than one reason. Alright, well, he was mostly dumbfounded because while Wukong was talking, a couple had walked up to them, a couple Lex knew very well. Brandon and Audrey Morrison, Alexander Morrison's grandparents, and two of the most ridiculous people alive, walked up behind Wukong. Brandon tried to grab onto Wukong in a headlock, but Audrey slapped him on the back of his head, knocking him aside. Ah, Brandon and Audrey, I'm glad to see you're back. How was your doctor's visit? By the way, I'm taking a survey that has a 1 million MP reward. I suggest you guys take it as well. Lex and Ripley both shared a look, and got the feeling that the two new additions did not exactly know the true details of their associate, so it was best they not mention it. Not bad at all, Brandon said with a grin. The doc said it's going to be triplets. Considering that I'm going to need money for the baby's milk powder, a 1 million MP survey sounds just right. I am considering a divorce, Audrey said without the slightest change in expression. I'm not at the age of having kids. This man has no self-control. My grandson is the one who should be having kids. Of course, I would love to include you in this survey as well, Ripley said without the slightest hint or hesitation. During your stay at the inn, has there been anything that you found dissatisfactory or disappointing? It's more or less what I expected. I have no complaints, said Wukong with a shrug. Nah, the vibe is different, Brandon said. Back in the day, when the inn was new, it felt much cozier and fun. Now, even with all the expansion, it's too crowded for my taste. Don't listen to him, Audrey said, her expression still the same. He's just sad I refuse to do any more beauty contests. I'll have to admit, that was a bad idea on my part. Ripley continued to ask the trio more questions while Lex just stood there, silently listening, keeping his mind completely blank of all thoughts. But an empty mind did not mean his emotions or feelings were also lacking, and at the moment, he was feeling extremely screwed. Brandon was trying to find Wukong a girlfriend. Chapter 1340 Just act normal. So what you're saying is, you're dissatisfied with the Midnight Inn because you weren't able to find a good partner for your grandson here? Ripley asked, making sure he understood the answer correctly. What is so difficult to understand about that? Audrey questioned. This is the Midnight Inn. They have guests from all over. Many of them are supposed to be very powerful. No doubt, many of them come from prestigious backgrounds. So how come none of them could catch my grandson's eye? He is still running around with those buffoons, trying to grow stronger or something. I blame the way my son raised him. Too much of a work ethic, and not enough appreciation for life. Considering Alexander's entire life had been one long training montage, was it any wonder that he continued to train to this day? Lex looked behind Audrey at the sight of Brandon trying to convince Wukong to accept a blind date, whereas Wukong was adamant that he would no longer see one of Brandon's descendants as a date. Lex did not question the sight. He did not think. He had shut down his thoughts because the situation was just too damn dangerous. Yes. I think I understand. That, I think, will conclude our survey for now, Ripley said as he wiped his forehead with a handkerchief Lex had given him. Here are your tokens for taking the survey, Lex said as he handed them all physical tokens that looked like poker chips, each one containing 1 million MP. Speaking of MP, Brandon suddenly said, looking away from Wukong. I think there is something wrong with your service. Old Wu here has been complaining about being unable to get any MP, which is really odd because I only need to think about the payment for it to process. Lex and Ripley both looked towards Old Wu with a hint of confusion, only to see him nod. For certain reasons, I cannot get MP through the usual means, he confirmed. My apologies. Please, accept this as a token of our regret, said Lex, and handed Wukong another token, this one containing 1 trillion MP. This one wasn't limited to gambling, and could be used anywhere. Wukong simply nodded dismissively, and Brandon and Audrey didn't pay special attention to them either as the trio walked away. Even from a distance, Lex could hear Brandon convincing Wukong to see his grandniece twice removed, until he eventually relented with a sigh. For a few minutes, both of them just stood there, not moving, till Ripley finally turned towards Lex. I hope this is not prying, and if it is you do not need to answer but did you know you had such a guest at the inn? Lex shook his head, as he slowly allowed his thoughts to return, not that it would be any protection from a Dao Lord. If you don't mind, I'll be taking a small break before we continue the survey, Ripley said, and then quickly vanished from the inn, leaving Lex all alone. You need to change the evaluation criteria of the inn. Don't audit it as a place for mortals to rest. Instead, evaluate it as a secret retreat for Dao-level entities who want to immerse themselves with those at a lower level. It should have been an easy thing to guess right from the start considering that all auras are completely suppressed there. Ripley nodded, and quickly returned to the origin realm, while the director was left alone in his office once again. After a few more moments, which seemed to exhaust him further, the director made a call he really didn't want to. Talk to the board members and put a new topic on the agenda for the next meeting. After the next Giganum fiscal report, we're going to prepare for currency exchange with the midnight in internal currency. No, I don't know what the exchange rate is going to be. Have someone look it up. And find out how we can open a branch at the inn. The director wanted to hang up the call right after that, but he knew he couldn't. The problem was, he couldn't provide the answers to the questions he was asked either. Back at the Midnight Inn, Lex sat opposite Mary in the Chamber of Secrets. For a long time, they sat in silence, until finally Lex spoke. What the hell are we going to do about well, you know what inside the inn, he exclaimed, genuinely troubled. He could bluff a lot of things, but he was certain that if a Dao Lord spent any excess amount of time within the Midnight Inn, they'd see through him sooner or later. More importantly, how many people were going to use the Innkeeper would have stopped me if he wanted to excuse. Had no one considered that the Innkeeper didn't even know? Of course not. Lex, I genuinely think the best course of action for you is to pretend like there is nothing wrong, and that he is just another guest at the inn. Huh? Lex said, not expecting that response. Look, the less you know the better. All you need to know is that he has a certain reputation. As long as you don't bother him, he won't bother you. Probably. That philosophy was literally akin to an ostrich hiding its head in the sand, hoping no predator would attack it. Unfortunately, in this scenario, Lex was not even an ostrich. More like a newly hatched, barely able to walk bird. If there was ever a time he would be putting his trust into Mary, it would be now if he really followed her advice. The thing was, he had no alternative. Fine. What's the worst that could happen? Don't I face death in every single serious fight anyway? How is this any different? Lex asked, psyching himself up as he deleted that guest's name, and returned to the inn to find Ripley sitting in a lawn chair, drinking from a coconut. You ready to get back to business? I must say, this is the most exciting survey I've ever done. That's one way of putting it, Lex murmured, as he also grabbed a drink. Yeah, I guess I'm ready to continue. He was slightly afraid of what the next guest they surveyed might turn out to be. Fortunately, the next few guests were relatively normal. Things were finally heading in the right direction. Until they weren't. A fully armored battalion of Marzu suddenly appeared in the city square, right in front of Lex, and from the angry glare they were giving everyone, Lex did not think they were here to go fishing in the wishing well. Chapter 1341 Survey I. Excuse me, would you be willing to participate in a survey? Ripley asked the mean-looking Marzu, completely indifferent to their extremely angry expression and demeanor. I am Jador, herald of the Hidden River tribe of Marzu, the ferocious beast declared, his voice traveling far and wide. Ripley quickly noted it down. The entire army of magic-wielding tyrannosauruses behind him responded to his voice by gathering their magic, having it sing as it coursed through their bodies. Thank you for participating. Now if you don't mind, how did you hear about the Midnight Inn? Remnants of a Marzu army returned to the Hidden River with news of sabotage and deceit, as well as the untimely death of the Witch of Hidden River, Feyor. They knew not the details of the enemy, and only spoke the words Midnight Inn. Got it. Midnight Inn, remnant army, dead witch. So these remnants from your army, what kind of feelings did they express when talking about the Midnight Inn? Warriors, one and all. Cold, hard, ruthless, leaving corpses in their wake. But their excellence provoked dire consequences. Got it, excellent warriors. Right, I noted that down. On a scale from 1 to 10, how easy was it for you to find the Midnight Inn? Behind Ripley, Lex scratched his head at the unexpected situation. He'd already had Luther called, who would no doubt answer any questions the angry magical dinosaurs had, but why were they taking the survey, and why was Ripley so bad at reading the room? Why does it matter? We shall hunt in the plains and in the valleys, we shall hunt in the oceans and across the volcanoes. No storm nor tribulation will prevent us from reaching our goal of vengeance. The Inn can only pray that they are not found guilty of being responsible for the death of Feyor. So you like the variety of scenery, and approve of the Inn taking a neutral stance on political issues, huh? Wouldn't have taken you as a political type. But wait, does the Inn have a hunting event? I don't think so. Going to have to note that down as a demerit. What about food? Are you looking forward to the food at the inn? I've heard they have the air of a celestial-level organization as a cook. We hunger only for the death of our enemies. We will bury their corpses in our lands, their flesh and blood nurturing the lands, granting our crops power. A fan of how the inn uses fertilizers, I see. How likely are you to recommend the Midnight Inn to a friend? All Marzu tribes stand at the ready, already aware of our excursion into the inn. Should we fail to return, they will take our place in our quest for vengeance. A blood debt is never forgotten. Oh, so you've already told all your friends, and if you find it so entertaining that you stay a while they will join? That's good to hear. Now tell me, do you plan on taking advantage of the inn's daycare services? By now, Luther, Z and Gerard had already arrived, ready to answer the Marzu's questions, but they were forced to wait as the Marzu were too engrossed in the survey itself. Lex looked awkwardly at everyone, and then just shrugged. He was having an unusual day, so he dared not say or do anything out of the ordinary, lest he attract even more trouble during the survey. As soon as he had that thought, Lex sensed the mountain man, who had been sleeping for a very long time, suddenly opened its eyes. Chapter 1342 Survey 2. Ripley was in the middle of questioning the Marzu when the mountain man, formerly known as Ming Jia, opened his eyes. Auras had no effect on anyone, not to mention that the mountain man was sitting far enough away from everyone that any abrupt movements on his part would not cause any other guests harm. That did not mean that others would not sense any harmless aura fluctuations, which is pretty much everyone in the inn felt it when Ming Jia woke up. Admittedly, there was a very brief period wherein mortal guests had taken up climbing the mountain man unassisted by tools or techniques as a method of training. But seeing as how that might be interpreted as harassment and invasion of personal space, the inn had quickly put an end to that. At most, they could only allow guests to pose and take pictures in front of it. So when the mountain finally did move, there were countless witnesses and guests there, who were momentarily stunned by the unexpected change to one of the inn's oldest tourist attractions. Then, the excitement of something novel filled them as they began taking even more pictures. What is that? Ripley, who finally paused his unusual survey, asked as he looked towards the towering figure far in the distance. An old guest who has been sleeping for a while. I might need to take a momentary leave to go talk to him and ensure there are no issues. If he is an old guest, then I think he qualifies well for the survey. I'm just about finished here anyway. Jador, thank you so much for participating in the survey. May you find the midnight in meeting if not exceeding your expectations. The angry-looking Marzu, who was ready to go to war, merely nodded dismissively. Luther and the others finally got a chance to go talk to them and clear the air to ensure there was no misunderstanding. The mountain man quickly went through his notifications, and finally figured out what the hell had happened to it. He had decided to follow the system's quests, as it concluded that it was the fastest way to grow stronger. The system had told it to plant itself and claim its territory, something that was not easy considering it had been effectively kicked out of its old planet. But the system also informed it that more quests were incoming if it merely waited for them in what was called semi-hibernation mode. That's what Ming Jia had decided to do, but did not realize that the time scale it was going by was that of a mountain. A couple of decades really were just like a few seconds to a mountain, so it had been sleeping for years and years. As if that was not all, it had experienced the baptism of the new realm being born and its abundant energy, causing it to undergo a mutation in the type of mountain it was. Originally, it was a normal mountain, made up mostly of dirt, rock and trace amounts of various ores in its body. Now, it was a spirit core mountain, meaning that a high-quality spirit stone deposit had formed inside its body, acting as its golden core, which changed the nature of the dirt, rock and ores inside of its body. It had grown stronger without doing anything, yet now the requirements for its growth had also changed. Unless it found another brand new realm in which it could plant itself, it was probably going to end up having to plant itself in the Midnight Inn. That greatly troubled Ming Jia, for more than one reason. It had wanted to once again become human, as well as go back and search for its original planet, as well as the princess he had sworn to protect. Now it had to face the fact that the princess was most likely already dead, and he had nothing to go back to. What was the meaning of its life? What was it? "Excuse me, I hope I'm not interrupting anything," said Ripley after he felt like the mountain had finally worked off its drowsiness. "I was wondering if you'd like to participate in a survey?" Chapter 1343 Survey 3. Ming Jia looked at the oddly friendly-looking human who had approached his face, and felt, well, odd. Firstly, the mountain man's instincts were telling him that in front of him was a mountain much taller than himself. That didn't make sense, but the former human took it as a metaphor for the old man to be more powerful than himself. Before he could make a decision on something, he got a quest from his system. Apparently this mountain in the shape of a human in front of him was considered an NPC, and was the source for a very important chain quest at the S-grade ranking, which was currently beyond him. Fortunately, the first quest in the chain was not tough, and just required him to make contact and develop a relationship. Just that in itself would complete the quest, and the reward would correspond with the difficulty of the quest, meaning it would be S rank. Although Ming Jia was depressed, and felt like he did not know what to do with his existence, seeing as the system was guiding him in a simple and straightforward manner, he decided to go along. Not like he had anything better to do. "Yes, I suppose I could take a survey," Ming Jia said, but then looked out at the massive audience he had gathered. "But a more private conversation would be better." "I'll take care of it," said Lex, who was standing nearby. "Don't resist." He teleported Ming Jia, Ripley, and himself to a secluded cottage where they could talk in peace. The cottage was not massive in size. Instead, it had a formation in place which automatically adjusted the size of anyone coming in so that they would fit in size easily. Even then, Ming Jia towered above the two humans, but at least it was much more manageable now. "Before we begin," Ming Jia said to Ripley, before turning towards Lex, "is the Innkeeper still available?" I would like to meet with him once more." "The Innkeeper is slightly preoccupied these days," Lex said, "but I'm sure a meeting can be arranged. He did leave some words for you with me, if you wish to hear them." The mountain man looked towards Lex with a tinge of hope. Just as they were leaving, Lex also let Ming Jian know that a mountain woman had left her contact information for the very eligible mountain man should he be interested. After that, Ripley continued to conduct surveys, some from guests and some from workers. He even surveyed the numerous animals, beasts, and sentient objects within the inn, such as the golf cart, the tree, the living wind. Gawain and Anita, who were only a few decades away from having their very own baby, gave quite an emotional survey. Anita, who was having her mood swings, was eternally grateful to the innkeeper, so much so that she promised the next dozen planets she sacrificed to increase her power would be dedicated to the inn, while Gawain himself simply thanked the inn for helping him overcome his introverted nature. The fact that he had hidden himself inside a rock, unwilling to come out no matter who tried to pull him out, for a very long time was a testament to his original quiet nature. The fact that his wife was a living undead, who was more than likely prone to killing any living being near them, just made it easier for him to continue being introverted. While taking notes of their survey, Ripley muttered a few odd lines such as housing homeless mass murderers and rehabilitating them. And social work for swords, whatever that meant. Then there were the surveys for the drama cats. That was destined to be a memorable experience as it was, but as it happened, when they went to interview them, the drama cats had a guest of their own. Pontiff Falufa, hero and nominal leader of the bunnies, had somehow encountered them, and turned them into his followers as well, equating him to the great and powerful Bob, first of the drama cats. The fact that Lex discovered that Falufa was also in the celestial immortal realm made that interview even more unusual, especially since Falufa seemed unable to gauge his true strength, and thought that nearly everyone and everything he faced was stronger than him. As such, whenever he fought, he always felt like he would manage to push out just enough power to win and survive, but never enough to excel. After that they interviewed a couple of kids, though they were no longer kids, who were actually werewolves, and just seemed like they were farming addicts. They had a whole story about how their clan wanted them away from combat, and that they should train their strengths, for which the inn was perfect. Lex personally just felt like they had become addicted to the feeling of planting carrots and harvesting them. Little Blue gave an interview, though it said no real words, acting much like Fenrir who would only bark. A barking whale was a bit of an oddity, but a barking kuan-pung was in an entirely different league of unusual. Ripley, at least, did not judge. He only wrote down a note labeling it as cute. The Crabman, also known as JFK, gave an interview. Some of the refugees from Earth gave interviews. A number of devils gave interviews. Jill, the fox who turned into a human and won the Lady Cosmos contest and was then being hunted by a race of disgusting slugs known as gelati, gave an interview. Vera and her mother both gave interviews. Heck, even the rhino centaurs gave an interview, and used it as an opportunity to mention countless times how merciful the inn was in allowing them to live after they attacked the inn in their ignorance. Eventually though, the survey portion of the audit ended, and they moved on to the next part of it, services and facilities. Chapter 1344 Extensive Audit I. Despite how agonizingly slow it was, an emotion Lex only felt because he wanted to hurry up and complete the changes with the system, surveying so many people was actually quite entertaining. The process actually took several days, and they surveyed over 10,000 guests, workers, and general inhabitants of the inn. It was good to see so many old faces once more, faces Lex expected to see more often from now on that his attention had returned to the inn. Yes, this was just a list of some of the beings surveyed, and in no way a reminder of characters long forgotten with their storylines with their personal issues unresolved. Why would Lex require such a thing? As an immortal now, his memory was perfect. As an example, Lex could easily recall countless others he knew from back when the inn was new, but they had not been able to survey for various reasons, such as Old Man Will, the Thulhu spirit, Remy, that weird Adelomorpher guy who wanted to start a cult within the inn, Alicia, the inn worker who formerly had a dessert farming system and was eventually reunited with her sister inside the inn, Brother Chen, and Lily who had a successful shop inside the guild hall, the old Queen of England, and the other nascent soul cultivators who had since come into agreements with devils, Layla, the former leader of the Peacock Warriors, Fardy and his wife, and so many others. Yes, just because Lex would now probably be seeing many of them again since his focus was now renewed on the Inn did not mean that he specifically needed to think of them again as a reminder of their existence. That would be like taking time out of his day to think about the fact that Earth, a planet existing in a former dead zone, a universal, unexplained phenomenon that existed in almost all mature and older, developing realms, had suddenly been flooded in spirit energy once again, as if whatever the cause for the existence of the dead zone was vanished on its own. NOV.LB/JNN. This was certainly not a foreshadowing of other dead zones ceasing to exist, resulting in unexpected developments later on in the future. Instead, it was just another, random thing he did not need to think about since he was occupied with other thoughts. For example, the option for an armory had been available to him for a long time, but he had never gotten around to opening it because he couldn't find a decent weapons and armor manufacturer. Xeon, the Drake refiner he hired so long ago, didn't count because he was kept busy with requirements of the inn and its staff, so he hardly ever interacted with guests. Lex made a mental note to hire the dwarf that made Naraka for the armory when he got the chance. But that was just one room that was in demand. Other rooms that guests wanted were forges for treasure manufacturers, alchemy rooms, formation rooms, talisman rooms, gravity rooms, rooms that acted like the vacuum of space, a void room, cursed rooms, etheric rooms, law research rooms, knitting rooms which were apparently absurdly popular due to the overwhelming popularity of the grandma deity, painting rooms, reading rooms, storage vaults, procreation rooms, which was a disturbing thought but apparently required for the survival of certain races, and quite a few more. Lex actually felt a little embarrassed when he opened that particular panel of his system, and promptly closed it. No point in introducing new services while the old ones were undergoing an audit. Speaking of which, when Ripley audited the wishing well and the mystery trial, he was genuinely stunned. In fact, Ripley even tried out the mystery trial himself, and came out feeling oddly subdued and furiously began taking notes on his clipboard. The thing that genuinely confused Ripley the most was why they hadn't added a Chaos Sea swimming pool. It wasn't even a derogatory question when he asked it. Rather, he felt like the Innkeeper probably had some hidden plan with it. Chapter 1345 Extensive Audit 2. That's when Lex discovered that among the genuine elite of the universe, the truly top-tier Dow-level factions, a Chaos Sea swimming pool was seen as a status symbol, and something that was genuinely enjoyed. The fact that only the most powerful of Dow lords could artificially create the Chaos Sea was a testament to how valuable it was. It also probably wasn't called Chaos Sea, as most people did not have enough of it to form a sea, but since Lex had been calling it that from the get-go, to change it now seemed unnecessary. Unable to think of a decent response, Lex acknowledged that the Innkeeper truly did have other plans. He did not want to squander his realm growth juice, which was definitely not as good a name as Chaos Sea. By far, the thing Ripley seemed most visibly bothered by was the massive spaceship that was being used as a daycare. He gave Lex a few odd stares, but ultimately said nothing, and just noting stuff down on his clipboard. Ripley also inspected the border of the inn, tried to exit himself which failed, and asked questions about any growth plans that the inn had, which at the moment was unnecessary. Let alone billions, even trillions of guests could easily fit in the space that was currently available to the inn. But while the inn had enough space to sustain so many people, whether or not their other facilities could support such a load was something that needed to be determined, something Ripley focused on. He personally used every available form of transport, ranging from golf carts, cycles, hover cars, trains, spaceships, peacock mounts, lazy rivers, walking paths, ziplines, teleportation formations, tuk-tuks, paragliding and parachuting. Fortunately, Ripley did not spend much time in each realm, basically just scanning it once with his spirit sense, so it took about 3 days to go through all the ones available and open at that time. It was quite insightful for him, because apparently one of the minor realms was just an expansive body of water which contained many races that lived in the water, one of which were mermaids. They were surprisingly friendly, and did not at all hold up to the racial stereotype of ugly creatures using their singing to attract people to their doom. Then, Ripley explored all the settlements, cities, villages, towns, lone cabins, and houses, and basically any place else where guests gathered within the inn. Considering that the wilderness of the inn actually now contained wild, non-sentient beasts that were actually a little dangerous to low-leveled guests, that area was not so wide. He took note of how far each settlement was from each other, their relative positions, their environment, landscape, weather, and prominent features. He compared the populations they could hold and created a population distribution map. He even took note of any significant or prominent tour attractions, natural wonders, sites, activities, and other key points of interest. At this point, the only thing Lex could say he enjoyed was when they stopped at restaurants and cafes to check out their foods. Many of them weren't even inoperated anymore, as the refugees who lived in the minor realms were operating businesses within the inn now, so long as they maintained their standards. From the thread count of the bedsheets, to the size of the formations in the restrooms, Ripley analyzed each and everything in such excruciating detail, that after an entire month when the audit finally ended, Lex nearly cried tears of joy. Or to be more specific, the part of the audit Lex could accompany Ripley on came to an end, for now the auditor began to test the smoothness of teleportations using golden keys from various environments within the origin realm. 1346 Totally not a mental breakdown. Screw your grandmother, the sentient planet screamed, making use of the power it had long been reserving to escape its galaxy-wide prison. Sure, the planet had more than enough lives to consume within that galaxy, and didn't need to escape. But it was the thought that mattered. It didn't like being restricted. But it didn't like being toyed with even more, so it unleashed its hidden powers, and teleported as fast as it could, finally touching the golden door. It wasn't even curious anymore about what the door held. It just wanted it destroyed. That is why the sentient planet was taken by surprise when the full force of its 278,229 US-wide body slamming into the door didn't break it. Instead, from the door, the sentient planet felt a request for a teleportation. Feeling intrigued once more, it gave the permission. What's the worst that could happen, the planet asked itself, thereby raising a massive red flag for itself before venturing off to go meet the human who made a living out of doing the absurd and the impossible. Just before it disappeared, the planet heard a very familiar sound. It was a new notification from its system. Lex threw himself into the hot tub, hoping for it to squeeze out the fatigue in his soul. It wasn't literal fatigue. As an immortal, it wasn't easy to exhaust him. But man, even having an immortal mind did not make it any easier to go through days of extremely tedious investigations. Actually, it did. Lex had long lost the ability to feel bored since his mind could be occupied by a billion other things without affecting his ability to function at all. But it was more the thought that counted than anything. He did work that felt like it should have been mentally and emotionally draining, so that's how he was going to act. It was a luxury he had as his own boss, sort of. Besides, it was only a little more time before the auditing resumed, so the only real work Lex could end up doing was continuing his negotiation with the system. That could be done in his office, or from the hot tub. Who was going to complain? Mary, it's been long enough, so let's get right to it, Lex spoke directly in his mind. Even if the system would keep everything he said safe, with a Dow Lord within the inn, he wasn't going to take any chances. Actually, Lex had no idea if the Dow Lord whose name he had erased from was still inside the inn. Although he had not tried looking for him, he discovered that scans of the inn did not reveal him at all. Second, he basically confirmed that all systems were connected. The quest literally stated that there was a system network that he needed to connect this new system to. This was not too much of a revelation though, as Lex had his suspicions when he discovered the upgraded version of the fancy monocle in the Infinity Emporium. But confirmation of it didn't feel as good as he would have thought. He had only just begun to trust his system. What was he supposed to do now that he was aware that there was a damn system network constantly monitoring all systems, and was even able to hand out quests? In truth, Lex fully intended on doing nothing. He had come to terms with the fact that, for now, the system was his biggest reliance. It was his greatest source of treasures, and was what allowed him to get in contact with so many extraordinary things. Without it, his growth would be stunted. All he needed to do now was just ensure nothing went wrong, try to control the situation as best as he can, and become insanely strong. Lex had a feeling that even systems could not so easily affect Tao Lords. He was also keenly aware that the system network, if that really was the thing that gave him this quest, had definitely been spying on him. How else could it so conveniently offer him the one reward he really wanted at the moment? The only positive he could see from this whole situation was that he could get rewards out of the system network, which seemed to have a higher authority than his system, and that it didn't seem to mind him wanting to do things differently. Oh, and also that he had a high authority and status, though he had no idea if that was due to himself or his very high-level yet broken system. It was not that Lex had suddenly become more trusting. It was just an inescapable effect of becoming an immortal. Lex was less anxious about potential problems, and more confident in his own ability to face them. Time did not return to its normal state of flow, and Lex suddenly received a bit of information as the quest panel disappeared from in front of his eyes. It was not that time had slowed down, but that his perception of time was being artificially accelerated to help him complete this quest. Speaking of which, he even received information on the quest itself. The aberrant system, or rather, the being who had it, had entered the inn, but instead of being teleported to the inn itself, it had instead been sent to the innkeeper's office. That was the extent of the help he received. Lex smiled, put on his host attire, and teleported to his office. He was smiling because he was looking forward to facing this brand new, unprecedented, and possibly extremely dangerous challenge, and not at all because he was having a partial mental breakdown from constantly having to face beings of unimaginable power. No, why would that bother him? Whether a Tao Lord could kill him, or a strong heavenly immortal, or an average or even weak celestial immortal, that was an equal amount of death he would be getting. It wasn't like one death was more serious than the other as far as he knew. So it was perfectly fine treating all beings above a certain threshold of power as exactly the same, because Lex was equally powerless in front of them all. Of course, he could also write them a strongly worded letter using the innkeeper's pen and ink. That would show them. Lex woke himself up from his random thoughts as he laid eyes on the newest guest in his office. It was a planet, and somehow the size-shrinking ability of his office turned the massive planet into roughly the size of a disco ball. But just because its size had changed did not mean it could be taken lightly. No, this was a being at the peak of the celestial immortal realm. Chapter 1347 Abruptly the Insatiable. Normally, faced with an unknown entity, the first thing Lex would do was scan them. Considering that his scan was now able to even detect people up until the celestial realm, it was much more useful. Unfortunately, the system scan never worked on others with systems, so Lex would have to gather all pertinent information himself, which for a few things wasn't difficult. Even with Lex's extremely limited experience with living planets, this being the first one he had met, he could tell that the planet in front of him had a cultivation of its own, and it was at, if not near, the very peak of the celestial realm. "Greetings, guest, to the Midnight Inn," Lex said. Pretending to be completely calm in front of a considerably superior entity that was capable of easily killing him actually made Lex feel slightly nostalgic. It had been a good while since he had done something like this. "I am the innkeeper, owner of this humble establishment." Lex did not continue. Usually, the initial introduction would be followed by a few other lines which would help guide the thoughts of his target along the lines that he wanted. The issue right now was, he had no idea how this planet had entered the inn, what its intentions were, and what Lex could possibly offer it. "I am Abruptly the Insatiable," the planet eventually said, after a few seconds of silence. "Are you truly the innkeeper?" From the... Lex should have known his reputation preceded him. He wondered which of his numerous feats had reached the sentient world. Was it the Midnight Games, which had swept a good portion of the Origin realm? Was it his act of almost slaying a deity? His latest cooperation with the Henali? Or perhaps it was. "Speaking of snacks, Innkeeper, I read something interesting in your comics. I wonder if the same is true for reality. Is it true that, once the inn is attacked, you keep the attackers locked in your inn as prisoners?" Although Erebos spoke politely and with a smile, Lex immediately sensed an immense amount of malice within the planet's words. In fact, now that he was sitting in front of Lex as a human, his expressions were even easier to read, and they were not pleasant. There was also the fact that Lex himself had read all the comics Velma wrote simply to make sure she did not reveal something best kept secret, and not at all because he liked reading comics of himself acting cool. Nothing in the comics had ever hinted at the innkeeping prisoners. That would create a very bad impression of the inn, and Velma would never do something like that. After all, if guests read about the fact that the innkeeper could forcibly shut down their ability to leave the inn, they absolutely wouldn't feel as relaxed. Before Lex could answer, Abruptly continued. Instead of keeping your prisoners captive within the inn, wouldn't it be better to send them elsewhere? Maybe a proper prison world? I don't know if you know this, but Henali sends all its death row convicts from across the entire realm to me to take care of. You could do much the same. Suddenly, Lex experienced something he had never felt before, at least as the innkeeper. He felt himself locked onto by a malicious spirit sense. Despite appearing with the aura of a Tao Lord, Abruptly had dared lock onto him. Chapter 1348 Do Not Tolerate Impoliteness. No wait, Lex suddenly realized that he wasn't portraying the aura of a Tao Lord. After all, most of the time, the innkeeper appeared in front of guests without any aura at all, and he had done the same when appearing in front of Abruptly. Or better yet, why don't you give me all of your guests? Abruptly's aura began to rise rapidly, just as his grin grew ever larger. Time seemed to slow down in Lex's eyes, and this time it wasn't because the system network had slowed down his perception of time. Rather, it was his own instincts at work. They communicated with him as clearly, or even clearer than they ever had before. Lex was about to die. He had been locked onto by a being he could not hope to resist, and it was gathering itself up to strike. In fact, the reason it had not already struck was because it was savoring the build-up, hoping to see some fear and terror in the innkeeper's eyes. That last bit was not information provided by his instincts, but Lex's own deduction, as well as his sixth sense, which was very good at determining others' feelings. NOV/LB/JNN. Yet in the face of certain death, Lex felt not an iota of fear. Lex had looked a demi-Tao Lord in the eyes and proclaimed vengeance in the future, so a celestial immortal could not intimidate him. Although he knew logically speaking he could do nothing to resist, Lex did not operate on normal logic. To kill him was far from simple. Heck, if nothing else, Lex was certain that if he unsealed whatever was in his mind keeping his time affinity at bay, both of them would die. So even if he were to die, he would not do so alone. With his decision made, Lex acted. He summoned the full aura of the innkeeper that the system afforded him, and for once mixed in his own domination as well. He put his entire being into squeezing out the most powerful domination he could muster, hoping that when mixed in with the innkeeper's natural aura, it would give a stronger impression. Outside, within the inn itself, the clear sky was suddenly overcast as heavy clouds appeared within the sky, and an oppressive aura filled every corner of the inn. Wukong, who was about to agree to Brandon's demand of dating his grandniece, felt the aura and snorted, turning away, as if he had been caught doing something shameful. Every other guest suddenly held their breath, and felt like they were on the precipice of doom. No one knew what had happened, and most couldn't even muster up the courage to ponder the reason for such a change at all. But none of them felt like they themselves were in danger, for the aura was not targeting them. No, Lex had not released a blind, targetless aura. Instead, it was tinged with his intention towards Abruptly. As for what his intention was? It was the intention of an elder to warn a naughty child. Oh, it was also filled with his intention to use his authority as a system owner to display the system interface, and that is exactly what happened. His system interface popped open in front of him, and so did Abruptly's system, the system. The ever-pleasant, ever-calm innkeeper displayed the slightest hint of disapproval in his eyes as he looked at Abruptly. Young man, although I welcome all guests, I do not tolerate impoliteness. Do not make me turn off your system for a while. It would be a shame for you to fail all 107 of your active quests. Erebotha's aura froze, and for the second time in its existence, it felt fear. The first time, it had felt fear when the governor had faced him and locked him in his galaxy. That was the fear of death. But this time he felt the fear of a secret revealed. Chapter 1349a, being at the pinnacle of existence. Silence. A heavy silence hung in the innkeeper's office as the innkeeper looked disapprovingly at Erebos, while Erebos himself was sweating in a panic. For those wondering, yes, planets could sweat. The people living on the planet itself referred to it as rain, but that was just a matter of semantics. Neither of them spoke. Or, to be more specific, after the innkeeper gave a verbal warning, Erebos had yet to react. That was fortunate, because Lex was taking his time reading about the system as much as he could from the interface. For a moment, he felt like he could control the entire system. While that may or may not be true, he could not do it without making his intention obvious. Previously, he had mixed his intention with his aura, and the planet's system responded. If he wanted to continue using it, he would need to make his intention clear somehow. He already tried giving Erebos' system a mental command, but it seemed not to respond to that, likely because he was not linked to the system itself. This was all new territory for him, but it was extremely informative and he needed to make the most of it. After all, he didn't want someone else doing the very same thing to him one day. But that was unlikely, because when he saw the interface, one of the things he noticed was that the system was an A-grade system, while the Midnight Inn was a divine-grade system, even if it was broken. This was just a guess of his, but Lex theorized that his superior authority, as stated by the quest he received previously, came from his system being of a higher grade than anything Lex himself did. He read through the rest of the interface, unable to actually interact with it without showing his intention somehow. No. Erebos pleaded, suddenly falling to his knees. No, Innkeeper. Sir. Lord. Please. I want to, no, I need to understand. Did you create the system? How could you know about it? No one knows about it. The innkeeper only shook his head, disappointedly. A frog at the bottom of the well knows nothing of the great sea. You presume to know secrets, yet you know nothing. You presume that you may do as you please without consequence, but you are a misbehaving child who has tasted the love of disciplining. Tell me, Erebos the insatiable, why should I answer your questions when you came to me in bad faith? I am a good host, but no one ever said anything about being forgiving. The planet started panicking as it quickly thought of a solution. In truth, it had little to no experience talking to others, mostly because it was busy killing or using them and did not know the concept of give and take. But it did understand quests. Lex watched with intrigue as a new entry suddenly appeared in Erebos' quest tab, and read it with a feeling of mild amusement. Less than a few seconds ago, this celestial immortal was about to kill him, and now it was stressed out because it did not know how to improve Lex's mood. The quest it received was also interesting. New quest, before you stands a being at the pinnacle of existence, holding on to secrets you cannot even begin to imagine. One of those secrets is how you can improve your system, and move on to the next phase of your existence. Placate the being, get into its good books, and do whatever you need to do to upgrade your system. Quest reward, dungeon upgrade panel. Quest failure punishment, all progress towards upgrading the system will cease for 500 million years. Remarks, legend speaks of a myth stating that there was once a rumor that the mighty innkeeper wields the butter knife of destiny. Do not verify if that legend is true, you may not survive the encounter. Chapter 1350 Storytime. Now that he knew what Erebos' objective was, Lex relaxed. Power lay in knowing what others wanted. With that knowledge, he could manipulate the situation to his benefit. In the beginning, the only reason he was on the back foot was because he knew nothing about Erebos, or its intentions. Now, not only had he gained the advantage, he also understood his intentions, which were to get into his good books. Lex literally held all the advantage, so he relaxed, and let Erebos make the next move. He would mold the situation like clay, turning it into an outcome he found acceptable. He was especially interested in Airboth's system, and what could be done with it. In fact, he even got a few ideas of how it could be useful. Unfortunately, Lex could not actually slay the evil planet and absorb its system, so he would have to settle for something else. NOV.LB/JNN. Airboth may be lacking in social grace, but he was not stupid nor was he inexperienced. If nothing else, just the lives of the trillions of beings that had once inhabited his planet were stored in his mind like memories, a reservoir from which he could search for solutions. He went through the memories of billions of humans, compared their characteristics and nature to that of the Innkeeper, and came to a certain conclusion. The fact that he was even able to sit and have this conversation now meant that the Innkeeper was not too upset with him. If such was not the case, then the Innkeeper would have already either killed or banished him. With this knowledge, the planet felt like it had secretly regained a bit of its momentum, as the threat of death evaporated in its mind. Then, it continued to evaluate the lives of those humans, and determined the best way to proceed from this situation was to appeal to the Innkeeper's sense of empathy and mercy by being completely truthful. Even a hint of deceit would cause the plan to fail. My system also wanted me to grow stronger, but using the system. It gave me quests to do. As I was being ruled by instinct anyway, slowly controlling the slow and growth of natural treasures, affecting the flow of history of sentient beings within myself, I instinctively began using my system as well. My system allowed me to pass out systems to a few others. When I started out, I could only give one system out, thus creating the first every system user on my body. The system user grew stronger by killing others on a similar level, by gaining something called experience. But what it did not know was half the experience it gained was actually passed on to me, slowly raising my level as well and helping me grow stronger. The first system user died in the pursuit of strength, and so did the second, and the third. But the fourth was something special. He was a mastermind of death, and killed with precision and ease, allowing him to grow stronger quicker. As he grew, so did I, and I unlocked more features of my system. Instinctively, I gave the fourth system user more and more quests, helping him grow stronger and stronger. But then came a point he became the strongest on the planet, and I stopped growing. Fortunately, by then, I unlocked the ability to pass on more systems, and so a culture of killing developed. I started growing stronger even quicker, but then came a problem, an all too predictable problem. My planet became devoid of almost all life. Silence once again fell in the room, and objectively speaking, Lex could understand how growing up in such an environment could shape Airboth into a malicious, bloodthirsty, power-hungry planet. Of course, that did not mean he would excuse it, or even allow it. As Lex heard the potential that Airboth's system held, he could not help but admitting that he saw immense potential for it. Not that he wanted to condone killing. No, Lex already knew the other features the planet held by peeking at the interface, and had a feeling he knew where the story was headed. The feature of the system that Lex was most attracted to was dungeons. He was already planning how to help Airboth in the future. That brought a lull in my growth for a long time. The planet continued its story. Until there was finally a change. My system naturally ranked up.